My name is Arya. I'm 29 years old, an elementary school teacher in Colorado. My life had always been simple: teaching, reading, living in a small rented apartment just a few blocks from school. But everything changed on the day of my grandparents' memorial, when the whole family and neighbors assumed I would simply stand quietly weeping at the casket, then step back to make way for those who supposedly had a voice in the family. No one expected that. Right in the middle of a tearful ceremony filled with prayers, my grandparents' lawyer would suddenly step up to the podium, open a laptop, and connect it to the large screen behind him. The dim lights faded, and then my grandparents' familiar faces appeared in a pre-recorded video. My grandfather's voice rang out, steady and clear. "If you are watching this, it means we are no longer in this world. And today, we will reveal the entire truth about $30 million, about the secrets we have kept for many years, even things that might tear this family apart." The entire hall froze. My parents went pale, like stone. I stood rooted, heart pounding wildly, with only one question echoing in my mind. What were my grandparents about to reveal? Have you ever discovered that your family was not what you thought? Have you ever been forced to choose between truth and your own blood? If you've ever felt that, share it in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you can follow this story. Because from that memorial on, my life took a completely different turn. I still remember my father's eyes at that moment, even before the video ended. He yanked my mother's arm hard, as if he wanted to retreat from the humiliation that was starting to unravel. And me, I was nailed to the cold room, feet frozen, though my heart felt like it would leap out of my chest. My grandparents, Robert and Margaret, were never the type to create drama. Throughout my childhood, I grew up with their gentle laughter in a small wooden house on the edge of Evergreen. Summer afternoons, I watered tomato plants with my grandfather, while my grandmother bustled in the kitchen, pulling out trays of fragrant cookies. My parents' house, on the other hand, stood in the town center, large, glossy, with every convenience, but without a single old bookshelf, without the faint scent of cinnamon, without genuine laughter or the kind gaze waiting for me at the door. There were only cold reminders about grades, attitude, and reputation. My father, Michael, was a successful man, at least in the eyes of others. He ran a financial consulting firm and always attended parties with my mother, Karen, a perfectly polished woman with every strand of hair in place and not a wrinkle in her dress. To them, I was part of their portfolio of achievements: the obedient child who attended school on time, scored well on exams, and maintained a proper public image. But all those years under their roof, I never felt truly seen. From the time I was little, I was often sent to my grandparents on weekends, then eventually the entire summer. They said it was because my grandparents were lonely, needing company. But I knew it was simply how my parents cleared me out of their schedules, and those years with my grandparents saved me. Grandpa Robert always called me his thoughtful girl, yet he never asked me to be perfect. Once, when I broke my grandmother's favorite orchid pot, he crouched down to clean up the shards with me and said, "Flowers can always be replanted, but the courage to admit mistakes must be preserved." Grandma Margaret often rubbed my back at night before I fell asleep, telling me stories from their youth, how they started with nothing but an old truck and a dream of building the most trusted logistics company in the West. They rented a small garage, drove, fixed the truck themselves, and went out to find customers. No one backed them, no one believed in them. I once asked why they didn't let my father take over the company, especially since he studied business management. She looked at me with sadness in her eyes and said, "A person can learn every theory in the world, but if he doesn't understand the value of kindness and patience, he can't manage anything that lasts." Even as a child, I understood. My father had never respected their simple way of life. He wanted to expand aggressively, partner with foreign corporations, and abandoned the strict standards my grandparents always upheld. He didn't believe in putting people before profit. I remember the night they refused to hand him control. I was 11. They had invited him for dinner, a real family meal. I helped Grandma bake an apple pie while Grandpa poured wine outside. But after dinner, when he brought up taking an executive role, the air turned icy. My grandfather, calm but firm, told him he wasn't ready, that the company needed someone who knew every worker, every route, every contract, not just someone skilled in boardroom negotiations. I will never forget my father's cold stare as he stood up. "Then keep your dusty old company," he said, leaving without even glancing at me. From that day, the gap between my grandparents and my parents grew, and I seemed stuck between two worlds. At my parents' house, I had to sit straight, smile at the right time, say the proper things, never reveal emotion. At my grandparents', I could cry if I needed, laugh if I wanted, run muddy, and not be scolded. Every time I returned, my mother's eyes narrowed. Is that how a daughter of Michael and Karen is supposed to act? But the older I grew, the clearer it became where my true home was. I wasn't born to be anyone's image. I chose to become a teacher not for money, but because I loved those little eyes looking up at me, full of curiosity and trust. Every child in my class was a world needing to be heard and guided, the very thing I longed for in my own family. And my grandparents understood. They were the only ones who never made me prove my worth with a title. I kept visiting them every weekend, even during busy school years. Once, Grandpa took me to the garden and handed me a small wooden box. "If someday everything feels too complicated, remember you are not alone." I didn't fully grasp his meaning then, until today. When that video played, when secrets began to surface, I finally realized they hadn't just left me an inheritance, but also a question still unanswered. And from that moment, everything in my life began to change. It was a foggy evening. I was in class, grading messy first-grade essays, when my phone rang, an unknown number. I nearly ignored it. But something made me pick up. "Is this Miss Aria Foster?" A low, steady male voice. "This is Officer Caleb with Evergreen Police. I regret to inform you." I shot up, my chair clattering to the floor. "There was a serious accident about an hour ago at Forest Hill intersection. The vehicle of Robert and Margaret Foster was struck head-on. They died at the scene." My head roared. The air thickened. I couldn't make out the rest, only that he mentioned a drunk driver and ended with condolences. I collapsed right there in the empty classroom. It felt like everything drained out of me. They were gone. I hadn't seen them that weekend because of a slight cold. Grandma had video called, smiling as always. "Drink ginger tea. Don't rush back to work." I nodded, not knowing that would be the last time I saw her. The funeral was held 3 days later. It was quick, neat, just the way my mother liked. Formal, clean, no one allowed to weep too loudly, no mascara running. I wore the black dress they had given me 2 birthdays ago, standing silently before their portraits. The hall filled with people, old business partners, neighbors, a few from charities. Not a single worker from their company came, which cut me deeply. My father gave a polished speech about their community influence, sustainable business, their financial legacy, but nothing about kindness. Nothing about rainy afternoons when they drove to deliver food to laid-off families, or paying for a Mexican student's college tuition with their retirement savings. The longer I stood there, the tighter my chest became. That night, unable to sleep, I searched online for news of the crash. Most reports were brief. A few repeated the police statement. "Silver GMC pickup truck, suspected drunk driver, ran a red light, hit 2 elderly victims." But one detail stopped me. A photo posted by a passerby showed the scene. In the corner of the frame, a black car was driving away. Not an ambulance, not a police car. I zoomed in, straining my eyes. It was a luxury black sedan, the same model I'd seen in my brother Ethan's garage. I shook my head. Maybe coincidence. There are hundreds of black cars on the road, yet my chest wouldn't settle. The next morning, I went to the police station. I asked to see the full report. The desk officer gave me a tired look. Everything's been concluded. The driver was drunk, currently in custody awaiting trial. I asked about the traffic camera at Forest Hill. He typed, frowned. Strange. The footage from that time didn't save. System showed a technical error. I stood frozen. Does that happen often? I asked. Not really. But it's not unheard of. Old system. I walked out of the station, my head full of questions. Not just the missing footage, not just the black car, but also something in the way my father had been acting recently. The day before the crash, he had visited my grandparents. I knew because I arrived late and saw him leaving. He didn't greet me, only glanced as if I were a stranger. When I went inside, Grandma sighed, her voice heavier than usual. He asked about it again, but we won't change our minds. I hadn't asked in detail. I thought it was just another old company dispute. Now, looking back, I'm not sure it was that simple. I reopened my grandmother's notebook, filled with lists of chores, gardening schedules, little notes about me, reminders of what spices to add to her recipes. In the middle of last month's pages, there was one line. If it really happens, Arya must check the backup camera. Backup camera? A chill ran through me. I called Carlos, my grandparents' longtime housekeeper. He had always been their trusted man, caring for the house, maintaining equipment, tending the small garden in back. Carlos, do you know anything about a backup camera? Maybe something installed at the house or somewhere else? The other end of the line went quiet, then he sighed. Miss Arya, Mr. Robert asked me to install a private system in the back, separate from the main one your father, Michael, had set up. He said he couldn't fully trust anyone anymore. That system stored everything independently. I still keep the memory card in a small safe in the garage. I gripped the phone tighter. Can I come get it? Of course. I'll be waiting. But you must be careful. Someone came by 2 days ago asking about the security equipment in the house. I sat silently in my car, fingers clenched around the steering wheel. Outside, a light drizzle blurred the windshield, wind shaking dry leaves loose from the trees. What I felt in my chest then was no longer grief. It was something colder, sharper, a kind of alertness strong enough to numb reason. My grandparents hadn't died in an accident. I couldn't yet say for certain, but every sign pointed in one direction. And if someone had a hand in their deaths, then I had to uncover the truth, even if it meant facing my own family. The will reading was held in an old law office inside a 3-story red brick building downtown. I arrived 15 minutes early, clutching a canvas bag with the notebook, my phone, and an unopened water bottle. Not because I was thirsty, my throat had been dry all morning. Matthew Goldstein, my grandparents' personal attorney, opened the door. He was nearly 70 now, his hair much grayer than the last time I saw him, over a year ago. But his eyes were still sharp, his voice still low and steady, the same tone he'd used when helping me apply for college scholarships at 17. You're early, he smiled, shaking my hand warmly. I couldn't sleep last night, I said, forcing a smile. He nodded without asking further, then led me into a high-ceilinged room with dark paneled walls and a long table topped with a thin glass sheet. In the center lay a thick file and several paper cups of steaming coffee. I chose a chair near the end, my back to the window, eyes on the old oak outside shedding its leaves. Exactly at 10 a.m. I heard my mother's heels clicking sharply against the tiled hallway. She entered first in a deep blue dress, hair pinned tight, eyeliner sharp. My father followed, phone in hand, not looking up. My brother Ethan came a few minutes late, jacket unbuttoned, shirt wrinkled, his smartwatch glowing constantly at his wrist. Aunt Linda and Uncle Ray arrived too, she whispering into her phone, he nodding briefly to everyone without a word. No one looked at me for longer than 2 seconds, as if I didn't exist in the room. Matthew waited for everyone to sit, then cleared his throat, opening the file. Before we begin, I want to emphasize something important. The will you are about to hear was prepared 8 months ago, when Mr. Robert and Mrs. Margaret were fully lucid, evaluated by 2 independent doctors, and recorded on video throughout the signing. My father gave a dry laugh, muttering just loud enough for me to hear, "They went that far?" My mother laid a hand on his knee, a signal to keep silent. Matthew went on, "I will now read it, word for word." He opened a typed document nearly 20 pages long, reading in his first and measured, steady tone. "We, Robert and Margaret Foster, in full capacity and free will, draft this will with full awareness, under no influence from anyone." The air in the room thickened like old smoke. I caught every word as if I were counting my own breaths. "We leave our entire estate, including all properties, bank accounts, shares in Foster Logistics, investments, and personal assets, valued at 30 million US dollars, to our only granddaughter, Arya Grace Foster." A heavy silence pressed down, stretching too long. I sat motionless, hands clasped beneath the table. No one moved. Ethan broke it first. "What?" His voice rose. "What the hell did I just hear?" My mother turned to Matthew, voice low but sharp. "Is this some kind of mistake? We are their children. I am their legal daughter-in-law. My son is also their blood." Matthew looked up calmly, without hesitation. "Mr. and Mrs. Foster made this decision after careful thought. They left a written explanation and a recorded statement. I will show it after I finish reading." My father pushed back his chair, standing abruptly. "Impossible. Arya is an elementary school teacher. What does she know about finance, about running a company, about managing a fortune this size?" My mother joined in. "She must have said something, done something to manipulate their minds." I still hadn't spoken. My stomach twisted. I hadn't known I would inherit anything. "I never imagined it would come to this," Matthew continued unfazed. "Allow me to read further." He opened another envelope, pulling out separate papers, eyes steady on the lines. "Mr. and Mrs. Foster explained in writing, we leave nothing to our son Michael Foster, his wife Karen Foster, their son Ethan Foster, nor to Michael's sister Linda Ray and her husband Raymond Ray. This decision is not born of anger, but of long disappointment." My mother leaned forward, her voice breaking. They really wrote that?" Matthew nodded. "And here is the reason." He produced more documents, financial statements, transfer records, printed company emails, each marked carefully. "For the past 5 years, Mr. and Mrs. Foster were pressured by Michael Foster and Linda Ray to sign certain asset transfers. Some documents were altered after signing. Several funds were withdrawn without notice, funneled through shell companies under Ethan Foster's name. All of this has been verified and notarized." My father stormed forward, yanking a stack of papers from Matthew's hand, eyes darting across the lines before turning to my mother. You said I covered everything." Linda flushed red, shooting up from her chair. "I had nothing to do with that." Matthew cut in firmly. "Let me be clear, Mr. and Mrs. Foster hired an independent audit team last year after noticing discrepancies in internal reports. They also recorded every conversation regarding money over the past 2 years. A compilation video will be played next, if any of you still doubt the integrity of this will." For a moment, the room tilted under me, not from triumph, but from the weight of a truth I had never wanted. I wanted them alive, I wanted evenings of ginger cookies and stories. I didn't need $30 million. But what they left me was more than assets. It was truth, responsibility, and a life I couldn't turn away from. The next afternoon, I received a text from my mother, just one line, 6 p.m. tonight, the estate. The family needs to talk. No exclamation points, no comfort, not even a word of concern, though the will reading had ended less than 24 hours earlier. I hadn't planned to go. My body was still taut from yesterday, my mind spinning from all the revelations and the accusing stares of the people who raised me. But then I remembered my grandfather's eyes that last day when he pressed an old brass key into my hand. Truth will protect you, but only if you dare to face it. I drove to the estate right on time, my old car crunching over the stone drive, past the manicured roses and precise grass lines my mother paid landscapers to maintain. The heavy wooden door opened before I could knock. Ethan stood there, phone in hand, irritation plain on his face. Come in. They're waiting. I stepped into the grand hall, my rubber soles squeaking softly on the cold marble. The living room glowed under the chandelier, beige curtains drawn thick, shutting out the outside light. My father stood by the fireplace, amber drink in hand, eyes cold as if I were a stranger trespassing. My mother sat on the sofa, hands clasped, silk dress flawless. Aunt Linda sat nearby, her perfume so strong it nearly made me turn back. I took a chair opposite them, leaving enough distance that I could rise and leave if I had to. My father set his glass down on the table, his voice dry as stone. There's no need for long speeches. You've seen the damage caused by your reckless actions. But this can still be fixed. I met his eyes calmly. I haven't done anything wrong. Ethan laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. Nothing wrong? You take the entire estate and sit there playing innocent? You think you can run a logistics company worth tens of millions? Who do you think you are? My mother placed a hand on Ethan's arm, silencing him, then turned to me, her voice soft but cutting. Arya, sweetheart, I know you're confused. You've always lived in a simple world. Teaching, reading, tea, now an enormous fortune has fallen into your hands. That pressure, it will destroy you. Aunt Linda leaned forward, lips curved as if in sympathy. We don't want everything. We just want fairness. You'll still keep a share enough to live comfortably. We propose you sign over 95% of the estate. We'll manage it for you. You'll keep 5%. That's more than generous. I exhaled slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on my father's cold face. Grandma and Grandpa chose me, not you. My father's expression shifted. He leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. Don't get too smug. You think one will and one video are enough to hold everything together? You think people will believe an elementary school teacher over someone who led a corporation? Or do you think no one will care when we start sharing a few interesting details about you? I froze. You went to a therapist, didn't you? Ethan cut in, phone in hand. Do you want your treatment records from when you were 23 to get leaked? We've got copies. Anxiety disorder. Emotional instability. Unfit to manage major assets. My mother tilted her head, her gaze frighteningly pitying. You can avoid all of this trouble with one signature. You'll still live your life. No one will bother you. No press, no court. We settle it within the family. I turned toward the window, where a maple tree shed its leaves outside. The faint scent of cinnamon brushed my memory, the smell of Grandma's baking. I closed my eyes for a moment, searching for their warmth. Yes, I had therapy, I said evenly, my voice clear. Because I grew up in a family where feelings were forbidden, where people smiled through dinner and stabbed each other the moment they left the table. I had anxiety not because I was weak, but because I was exhausted from trying to please people who never accepted me. My father shot to his feet. Are you speaking to your parents like that? I stood too, never breaking his gaze. I'm speaking the truth. Ethan pulled a folder from his jacket and slammed it onto the table. This is a draft transfer agreement. Sign it. If you don't, we'll take legal action. And trust me, we have enough connections to make sure you lose more than the estate. You'll lose your reputation, your job, even your legal standing. I looked at the folder, then at each face around. The room, none showed regret, only calculation, coercion, and a flicker of disdain. I bent down, not to sign, but to reach into my bag. I pulled out the USB drive Matthew had given me the day before. If you're prepared to go legal, then consider this my response. I placed the USB on the glass table, its reflection gleaming like a warning. Inside are verified copies of the transactions you and Aunt Linda made behind my grandparents' backs, plus recordings of both of you discussing forcing them to sell shares to third parties. All authenticated and stored on an independent system. No one spoke. The only sound was the steady tick of the wall clock. I adjusted the strap of my bag, my voice low but steady. I won't sign, and I won't let you turn their deaths into an opportunity. No one stopped me as I walked out of that room. No one called after me. No one followed, pretending to care. Only the heavy slam of the estate's door echoed behind me, reverberating into the falling evening. 2 days after that confrontation, I found a letter slipped under my apartment door from the building's management office. A short notice, printed on thick paper, cold and formal. We regret to inform you that the lease agreement between Miss Arya Foster and the property owner will be terminated early, effective the 15th of this month, at the request of the primary investor. Please vacate the premises within 5 business days. I stood in my small familiar kitchen, crushing the paper in my hand, tears rising not from fear but exhaustion. I had barely staggered out of one battle, and now another attack, quiet but cruel, was already waiting. The building was owned by a major real estate company. I vaguely remembered hearing it was tied to a financial fund my father managed. When I signed the lease 3 years ago, it was my mother who recommended it, saying, "Family should help each other." So it had only been another lock trap disguised as kindness. I tried calling the management office, but no one picked up. Every line went to voicemail. That night, I packed the essentials: savings book, personal documents, laptop, and a few keepsakes. I didn't own much, didn't need much, but each corner of the apartment brought a sting to my eyes. This was the space I had decorated myself, where I prepared lesson plans, read late into the night, and wept alone after losing my grandparents. And now, with a single nod from them, it was no longer mine. The next morning, I went to school drained. Dark circles rimmed my eyes from no sleep. The principal asked quietly during break, "Are you all right? Do you need a few days off?" I just shook my head and smiled. If I took time off, where would I go? By noon, I sat in the small cafe across from school, the one I often stopped by after class, when a man in a gray jacket walked in. I recognized him. I had seen him several times lately, at the supermarket, at the gas station, even outside the school gate. I'd never thought much of it, but now I was certain I was being followed. I stayed still, phone on the table as if checking the time, but actually snapping a quick photo. He sat at the bar with his back to me, but every so often glanced over his shoulder. Once our eyes met, and the way he instantly looked down, pretending to adjust his sleeve, sent a chill through me. That afternoon, I met Matthew at his old law office. Every time I stepped inside, it felt like entering another world, one of the few places where someone was still on my side. Matthew poured me a glass of water, then laid a hand on the folder in front of him. "They've launched their campaign," he said quietly. "A journalist friend told me someone's trying to leak details about your mental health, including your private clinic treatment at 23. I nodded, not surprised. "They've hired someone to follow you. I have proof," I said, showing him the photo I'd taken. "At the cafe." He glanced at it, then gave a short nod. You need to move out of that apartment as soon as possible. Staying there isn't safe. I leaned back, covering my face with my hands. I have nowhere else to go. He stood, crossed to a wooden cabinet, and after a moment returned with a carved wooden box, palm-sized, its lid etched with a lavender branch inside a circle, the same symbol I had seen in Grandma's notebook. This, your grandparents entrusted to me, with instructions to give it to you only when necessary. I took the box and opened it carefully. Inside were a dark leather journal, a USB drive, and a set of old iron keys on a faded leather fob. I don't know everything on that drive, Matthew said, but according to Mrs. Margaret, what they left wasn't about money, it was about trust. I opened the journal. Grandma's handwriting was soft and steady, each line precise. On the first page was a single sentence. If you are reading this, it means things have gone beyond what we ever hoped. But don't be afraid, we prepared a way for you. I turned the page. A hand-drawn map marked a house deep in the woods, about 20 miles from town. No exact address, just the words, safe place, ready. Trust your instincts. I looked up at Matthew. He nodded. That house is under a separate trust. They set it up 6 years ago. No one else in the family knows. I have the true address. The paperwork is under a shell company. If you need it, it can be your refuge or your new start. I clenched the keys in my hand. Cold, heavy metal, but it felt like holding on to my grandparents' last heartbeat. I'll go tonight, I whispered. Matthew rested a hand lightly on my shoulder, like a blessing. The road won't be easy, but they believed in you. Now it's time for you to believe in yourself. I left town at dusk. The fading light spilled across the treetops, leaving streaks of pale gold on my windshield. From the driver's seat, the silence of the road pressed in. The mountains stretched endlessly, as if guiding me into a part of memory never revealed. The house sat nearly 20 miles out, hidden among pines and fading red maples. Following Grandma's map, I turned down a narrow stone path nearly swallowed by weeds and vines. My tires rolled slowly over the rough ground, dust clinging to the windshield. I stopped when the wooden cabin appeared ahead. Weathered brown shingles, small white trimmed windows, porch scattered with leaves, but the structure stood solid, as if my grandparents had just stepped out briefly. I got out of the car, pulled the keyring from my pocket, and chose the one marked Main. The lock clicked softly. The door creaked open, revealing a quiet space inside, the scent of pine and dried mint nearly choking me with emotion. In the main room, a stone fireplace sat neatly against the wall. Above it, a framed photo of my grandparents in front of their first truck. To the left, a worn wool armchair. Across from it, a walnut desk coated with thin dust. On it sat a lamp, a calendar frozen at March 13th, 2 days before the crash. I flipped the light switch. The bulbs hummed to life. Power still worked. There was a small kitchen, a simple bedroom, and at the end of the hall, a locked office door with a mechanical code lock. I stared at the faded numbers, wondering if they'd left a clue. I tried Grandpa's birthday wrong, their wedding date wrong again. I drew a breath and entered my own birthday. A soft click. The door opened. Inside was a small pine-paneled room, no windows, only a bare bulb casting warm light. On the left wall, shelves stacked with files and labeled boxes. On the right, a large safe. At the center, a desk with an old laptop, a metal case, and a reddish-brown leather journal tied with ribbon. I sat down and opened the journal first. My grandfather's handwriting, careful, deliberate, stared back at me. October 22nd, Michael came to the house with a new contract demanding 35% of company shares. When I refused, he shouted threats of a lawsuit if he didn't get what he thought he deserved. Margaret quietly recorded the entire conversation. We have stored copies. This time I don't want to forgive. We must prepare. I turned to the next page, my breathing slowing. January 11th, Linda called, suggesting we transfer part of the assets under Ethan's name, claiming it was for tax purposes. When I expressed doubt, she said it was for the future of the family. I no longer trust anyone except Arya. She comes every week, never once asking about money. She's the only one who remembers my birthday without a reminder. I kept reading, each short entry like fragments piecing together a broken truth. In them, Grandpa noted meetings, times he was pressured to sign papers, internal financial checks. He and Grandma had quietly investigated for years. Not out of suspicion, but out of a disappointment too deep to name. I opened the small metal box beside me. Inside were an external hard drive, a USB stick, and several memory cards tucked into numbered envelopes. Labels read, Financial Transactions 2018 Office Camera March, recording Michael and Linda. I slid the USB into the laptop. The screen lit up with a plain folder filled with videos and audio files. I chose a clip about 5 minutes long and hit play. The image was of their old study. A camera fixed high in the corner captured the room clearly. My father stood before the desk, hand pressing on a contract. His voice was low, but sharp. If the two of you don't sign, don't blame me for using other methods. I've had enough patience. This is my life's work. There's no way I'm letting it fall into the hands of someone like Arya. Grandma's voice answered, calm and steady. Michael, this isn't about work. This is about who understands the real value of what your father built. Grandpa said nothing. He only looked at my father in silence. In my father's eyes, I saw resentment carved deep. I sat for hours, watching each video, listening to every recording, turning every page of the journals. Each file cut deeper into a truth I had never been allowed to see. When I reached the final entry, I paused for a long time. March 10th, Margaret told me someone tampered with the traffic camera system near Forest Hill. She doesn't believe it was random. Neither do I. If anything happens, Arya must come to this house. Here, she'll see everything clearly. The truth cannot be buried forever. I sat frozen. The lamp above cast light across yellowed pages. In that stillness, I almost heard Grandma's voice, gentle, unshaken, firm. This house wasn't just a refuge. It was the gateway to the secrets my family had buried for years, the place my grandparents had quietly prepared for me, a journey no one else dared take. And now, every page, every recording, every line of their journals lay in my hands. I stayed awake all night, reading, annotating, forcing myself not to drown in anger. By dawn, when pale sunlight crept through the wooden shutters, I closed the journal and sat in silence in the worn armchair. The house felt like it too was holding its breath for a grief with no words. I stepped onto the porch, inhaling deeply. The air was sharp with mountain chill, scented with damp earth and pine, so quiet I could hear the wind threading through the trees. Minutes later, the sound of a truck came up the stone path. A dark green pickup rolled to a stop. A short, sturdy man climbed out, his steps slower now, but his eyes still bright. "Hello, miss." "Arya," he said warmly. "I'm Carlos." I stepped down to shake his hand. His grip was rough, warm, steady, carrying the faint scent of engine oil. Carlos had been with my grandparents nearly 20 years, since the logistics company had only a few trucks and a small office on Magnolia Street. "I'm not surprised you came here," he said. "They always said if anyone truly understood and could preserve their legacy, it would be you." I invited him inside. He removed his cap, setting it neatly on the shoe rack, his gaze lingering on an old photo hanging on the wall. "Mrs. Margaret loved this one," he smiled. "Caught just as Mr. Robert finished washing their very first truck. They started from what no one believed could succeed." We sat in the kitchen. I brewed tea while he pulled a crumpled envelope from his pocket and handed it to me. Mr. Robert asked me to install extra cameras around the main house and garage, separate from the old system. He didn't say much, but I knew his trust had been fading for a long time. I opened the envelope. Inside was a memory card and a short note in Grandpa's handwriting. Forest Hill intersection, March 14, 8:23 p.m. I slid the card into my laptop. A video played, crisp despite being shot at night. A camera high above the garage captured the road. Headlights swept across a sleek black car sped past. The license plate glared under the lights, every character clear. I zoomed in. The first three letters struck me cold: EHT, registered to the company Ethan managed. Through the flickering light, the figure inside was indistinct, but the make of the car, the plate, the time all matched perfectly, with the vehicle seen leaving the crash site. "I've backed it all up," Carlos said evenly. "You can give it to your lawyer or the police. That's your choice. But be careful. Someone like Ethan isn't easy to face." I stayed silent, knotted inside. Not from doubt, but from pain now shaping into something undeniable. I didn't dare name what I suspected, but the pieces were locking together into a picture harsher than I had ever imagined. As Carlos prepared to leave, he paused at the doorway. "You won't be alone." Not everyone turned their back on them. They had people loyal to the end, and those people know who deserves their trust. He left me with the wind and the sound of my own heavy breathing. That afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. "Arya?" A woman's voice, steady but not tense. "This is Sarah Nguyen. I was head of HR at Foster Logistics until Michael, your father, forced me out 3 years ago." I sat up, heart pounding. I'd seen her name in some of my grandparents' files. Sarah had worked there 11 years, praised for her integrity and skill. "I'm not calling to complain," she went on. "I need to meet you. There's something I must give you in person. And something you need to know." We met at a small cafe on the edge of town near Mirror Lake. I arrived early, chose a corner table. Sarah walked in tall, lean, hair tied back, the calm of someone who'd endured too much injustice to fear anymore. After ordering 2 cups of black tea, she pulled a folder from her bag. "This is a copy of the contract Michael signed with a transport partner in Nevada. On paper, it's a technical partnership. In reality, it was a covert asset transfer. See here?" She pointed to a tiny note at the bottom of page 3. Written in different ink: "Asset held in trust, confidential transfer." I objected because it bypassed the board's approval. 3 weeks later, I was fired. No explanation. All my internal emails erased. But I kept this printout as proof, in case the day came. She looked at me, unwavering. "I stayed silent 3 years. Out of fear, out of hope your grandparents would handle it. But they're gone now, and I can't let someone like Michael bury what they built." I nodded, gripping the folder like clutching a piece of memory pulled from the dark. "Thank you," I whispered, words rough in my dry throat. Sarah touched my hand lightly before rising. "I'm not your only ally. There are many out there, people your grandparents once helped, treated fairly. We've just been waiting for a reason to return. And you are that reason." I sat alone, gazing through the cafe's window at the lake, catching the day's last light. Inside me, fear still stirred. But alongside it, something else began to rise, the quiet resilience my grandparents had planted in me all these years. It was no longer silent. The morning of the hearing, I stood before the mirror, adjusting my charcoal vest, hands trembling, though my heart had been bracing for this day for weeks. The eyes staring back weren't of a girl hiding at family dinners, nor the shadow deemed a burden behind someone else's glow. They were of someone walking into a battlefield she could no longer avoid. The car pulled up outside the district courthouse. A cluster of reporters waited. Flashbulbs flared as I stepped out, but I kept my stride steady, gaze unshaken. Beside me was Attorney Henderson, the man Grandpa once called the one who can find justice even buried under 3 layers of clay. He gave a small nod when he saw me tighten my grip on the thick file in my hand. Inside, the courtroom smelled of old wood, lit by dim yellow bulbs, solemn and suffocating. My family was already seated. My father, Michael, face carved in stone. Aunt Linda, gloved and stiff, as if at a gala. Ethan, arms crossed, smirking. Their lawyers, sharply dressed, flipped through folders like preparing to dismantle an untrained opponent. The presiding judge was Margaret Rogers, a silver-haired woman who had worked with my grandparents for over 20 years. Her gaze over thick glasses was stern but not unkind. "We are here today to hear the petition contesting the will of the late Robert and Margaret Foster," she began calmly. "The plaintiffs allege undue influence by the beneficiary. The defense asserts evidence to the contrary, with additional matters for consideration." My father's attorney rose, voice ringing. "Your Honor, my clients Michael Foster and Linda Ray were closest to the deceased. They contend that Aria Foster exploited their declining health to manipulate the will, seizing an estate valued at more than $30 million. The room stilled as Attorney Henderson stood, thick file in hand. "Your Honor," he said, his voice deep and steady, the same tone I had heard in private meetings with Grandpa. "We present evidence that refutes every accusation, including footage from a separate security system Robert Foster had installed, handwritten journals from both deceased, and documentation of systematic financial misconduct by Michael Foster and Linda Ray." I stood and walked to the witness stand. My hand rested lightly on the USB drive, my palm damp and cold, but my voice was steady. "This video was recorded on March 14th, the same night my grandparents had their accident. In it, you can clearly see the license plate and the model of the car belonging to the company run by Ethan Foster." The video played. On the big screen, a black car turned sharply at the Forest Hill intersection. The room fell silent. Ethan slumped in his chair, gripping the armrests. Then I pulled out the journal. Flipping to the marked page, I read aloud, "If anything happens to us, it won't be by chance. Margaret suspects the brake lines were tampered with. I've asked Carlos to keep a record." "Robert Foster." Whispers broke out. Linda leaned toward Michael, lips pressed tight. I continued, "Sheriff Allen, the same man who worked with my grandfather on several corporate crime cases, is also present today." A tall, gray-haired man in uniform rose from the back row, medals gleaming on his chest. He stepped to the podium, voice calm but firm. "After receiving this video from Miss Aria Foster and testimony from former employee Sarah Nguyen, we reopened the accident case. Initially, it was ruled as loss of control on wet roads, but we now have reason to believe foul play was involved, including the unusual presence of a vehicle registered to Ethan Foster's company at the scene." A sharp sound cut through the scrape of a chair as Ethan jumped up. "This is slander! You're fabricating evidence to destroy me." Judge Rogers struck the gavel. "Mr. Ethan, one more outburst and you will be removed from this courtroom." The atmosphere thickened. Attorney Henderson calmly placed more documents before the judge. "We are also submitting evidence of fraudulent contracts signed by Michael Foster, causing over $5 million in losses to Western branches. We have first-hand witnesses, internal accounting records, and recovered email correspondence from the company's system." The judge skimmed the pages, pausing at several. "The court will need time to review all evidence, but, as of now, the petition to contest the will lacks sufficient grounds." Linda sank into her seat, pale. Michael remained rigid, lips pressed as if swallowing bitterness. As the session adjourned, Sheriff Allen came to me. "You did well, Aria, but this is only the beginning. More truths need to come out." I looked around, feeling the weight of eyes that once saw me as weak, now forced to face reality. Behind me was the legacy of two people who had never stopped believing light would find its way back. When Ethan was handcuffed in the parking lot after the hearing, his arrogance was gone. His face ashen, eyes wild, realizing he had lost control. I watched through the courthouse window, not triumphant, not relieved, only hollow. Sheriff Allen later joined Attorney Henderson and me in his office. By then, I was officially under protection in a major criminal investigation. Henderson handed me a copy of the detention order and the inheritance documents. His voice softened. Miss Arya, as of today, you are the sole legal heir to the Foster estate. I nodded, the feeling not what I imagined. I thought this moment would bring clarity, like in movies of victory, a bright ending. Instead, there were only fragments I tried to gather, knowing they would never form a whole again. Days later, as accounting records from the logistics company came in, the full picture sharpened. Michael, the same man who once taught me how to balance a budget, now faced charges of fraud, funneling money through shell companies, and sham contracts with foreign partners, harming hundreds of workers. The IRS, internal auditors, and federal prosecutors were all involved. Karen, my mother, though not signing documents directly, had been listed as financial supervisor for 7 years. Her role could not be ignored. I sat by Henderson's office window, staring at a city bathed in pale sun, feeling a part of me hollow out. She hadn't called, hadn't sent a word since the hearing. But I remembered her eyes that day, fearful yet never repentant. News of Linda spread quickly. She vanished right after the hearing, leaving behind an empty office and piles of forged documents under review. A federal warrant was issued within 2 days, all her accounts frozen. Rumors placed her in South America, but nothing confirmed. Thinking of her, I felt only sorrow. She once helped run the company, once cared for me when my mother traveled. Now she was gone, as if she'd never truly existed. The civil court officially confirmed me as sole owner of the estate. 3 villas, majority shares in 2 family companies, and the trust fund worth over $30 million. I received the keys to the executive office but hadn't yet dared to step inside. When I moved back into the northern estate, Carlos waited at the gate. He smiled faintly, though sadness lingered in his eyes. "Would you like me to switch on the lights in your grandparents' old study?" he asked softly. I nodded, walking the stone corridor I once ran down as a child, hair dripping rain, cookie in hand. Every corner held a memory, as if they were still there, sitting on the sofa, discussing the morning news. The study was untouched, orderly, warm, serene. I opened Grandpa's desk drawer. A photo of him and Grandma in Europe was still there. On the back, in his slanted handwriting, "For Arya, if one day you must stand alone against the storm, remember, justice isn't in the papers, it lives in the heart strong enough to keep a promise." I sat, hand tracing the worn wood. Outside, Carlos waited silently, giving me space. In the following days, headlines erupted. Shareholders held emergency meetings. Michael's lawyers sought plea deals for leniency. Several domestic and offshore accounts were frozen. I was invited to speak at my first press conference as Foster Group's legal heir. I wore a plain white shirt, no makeup, no grand entrance. I said simply, "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to continue what my grandparents started, a business built on real work, real trust, and quiet integrity. I can't promise I won't stumble, but I will not turn away." In the crowd, Sarah, the former employee who had risked everything to meet me, stood, smiling gently, nodding, her eyes steadied me. That evening, I sat in the study, hand on a new folder. The community project my grandparents had dreamed of, a scholarship fund for underprivileged students. Under the warm lamp, I opened my laptop, drafting the plan. Outside, crickets hummed in rhythm with the keys. In that moment, I no longer felt alone. I wasn't rebuilding family, I was building something stronger from their ruins. I never thought the first scholarship award would fall on a rainy Seattle morning, cool winds brushing the lake like the walks Grandpa once took me on. The ceremony was simple. No live broadcast, no red ribbons, no grand stage. Just a small high school hall in the city's south side, where most students came from working class families. Yet, in that simplicity, every eye, every handshake carried more weight than any financial figure I had ever signed. On a makeshift wooden podium, I stood not as heir to foster group, but as a teacher, a granddaughter, and someone carrying forward what my grandparents couldn't finish. Each scholarship today, I spoke slowly, isn't just a gift. It's a promise made by the two people I admired most, my grandparents. They believed a decent dream can begin anywhere from a crowded block, from a rickety desk, or even from children forgotten by society. In the front row, a curly-haired boy in a worn jacket leaned on his mother's shoulder as his name was called. His teacher handed him the envelope. He looked up, eyes wet but shining. I froze, remembering myself at 16 shaking before a scholarship board, wearing a borrowed coat, terrified I wasn't good enough. Without my grandparents behind me, I wouldn't have made it. And now, I had the chance to stand behind someone else. The $15 million fund was divided three ways: for students in hardship, for children of factory workers once employed by Foster, and for building vocational classrooms in rural areas. I didn't just oversee it from afar. I joined volunteer teams, taught classes, listened to stories, laughter, even worries never voiced before. At an old textile mill in Spokane, I met Marisol, a retired worker who had been with my grandparents for nearly 30 years. She hugged me and whispered, "They held my hand when I had my first child. No one ever asked what I needed except them. You're doing the right thing, Nina." I didn't answer, only smiled and held her shoulder. Words weren't needed. They went straight into my heart, where they would stay forever. The mountain cabin, once a vault of secrets that tore me apart, was now home to young teachers choosing to leave the city to bring knowledge to remote towns. I didn't renovate it into luxury. We kept every stone, every misted window, so everyone there remembered. Ideals don't need wealth to begin. They begin with faith, with choosing to do what's right when no one is forcing you at all. Carlos, the old caretaker, is now the supervisor of the mentoring program. He still brews tea in the same porcelain pot, still quietly adds wood to the fireplace on winter nights. I once asked him if he regretted spending his life in the shadows, never choosing an easier path. He only shook his head. Sometimes people don't need the spotlight. They just need someone to believe in what they're doing and to know it's right. We sat together in the lit kitchen, talking about the children about to graduate, about the workers retrained to move into new technologies, about the women receiving small grants to start bakeries or sewing shops. No one mentioned Ethan or Linda or the lawsuits long past. They no longer had a place in the story I was writing. In my heart, family was no longer about blood. It was about those who chose to stay when everyone else had turned away. About those willing to sacrifice personal gain to hold on to what is decent. About hands clasped together, not because of shared bloodlines, but because they trusted one another enough to keep walking forward. On the evening after the scholarship ceremony, I returned to the school and sat alone in the empty audience seats. The stage lights had gone dark. Children's laughter still echoed faintly somewhere in the halls. I opened my phone and replayed the video of the curly-haired boy receiving his scholarship the moment he bowed his head and gripped that certificate like he was holding his entire future. A tear slid down my cheek. Not from sorrow, not from regret, but because I understood more clearly than ever, the inheritance my grandparents left me was never measured in numbers. It was in the choice to never bow, in the courage to hold on to values, in the quiet kindness strong enough to move even what seemed beyond saving. And perhaps that is what makes a family truly immortal. If you've ever stood at the crossroads between blood ties and what's right, ever wondered what's worth holding on to more, silence for the sake of peace, or the courage to defend the truth, share it with me. I truly want to hear your story. Because every one of us, no matter where we come from, carries a corner of the heart scarred by what is most familiar. What do you think about my journey? About choosing between a blood family built on deception and a new family forged through trust, loyalty, and humanity? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your words are what give me the strength to keep telling these stories about kinship, trust, and the values money can never buy. And if these stories touch something in your heart, a memory, a lesson, or simply a quiet moment, hit follow so you won't miss the journeys to come. Because in every family's life lies the unexpected. And sometimes the most precious inheritance isn't what's left behind, but how we choose to keep living with an unbroken heart.